spiritually, figuratively one with his people. And so every healthy relationship, every healthy marriage is a manifestation of the healthy relationship in Yeshua that Yahweh has with us, his Kehillah. Tov? Okay, now let's look at verse 11. Man is not independent of woman. Woman is not independent of man. Meaning every man and woman in Yeshua must have their heads what? Covered. Can we agree with that?
Yes.
But what Rav Shaul is saying is, okay, if every man and woman has to have their head covered, the issue here, the tension here, the struggle here, the difficulty here is, since every man and woman have to have both a spiritual and a physical covering, we've got to make sure that the man and the woman don't look alike. You understand what I'm saying? The principle is established. What? That both man and woman ought to have a covering in divine government in their roles over their life. So now we walk like Israel and make sure that when a man covers, as opposed to when a woman covers, he doesn't cover like a woman covers. That's the issue here. I dare anyone to challenge me and to prove me wrong. You can't be take a chapter talking about spiritual authority and then say, yeah, but verse 4 says men shouldn't wear head coverings. If verse 4 says men shouldn't wear head coverings, then verse 5 ought to say it, verse 6 ought to say it, verse 9 ought to say it. You can't take one verse, pull it out of context, and make it into a pretext. And let's be honest, how many of us come out of that background? Let's be honest. Yeah, we all do. We all come out of that background. Honestly, right? I used to sit in shul. I used to be a rabbi and wear a yarmulke because I thought I was obeying 1 Corinthians 11:4. You know what I was doing? I was dishonoring my head. I was saying, I'm not really a priest. Revelation 1:6 says Rabbi Moshe is a priest to Yahweh. Not the high priest. Who's the high priest? Yeshua. I can't go into the Holy of Holies, but I can go into the holy place. So I'm a priest. When I take off my head covering, I say, A, I'm not a priest. B, Yahweh's a liar. C, the Brit Chadashah is wrong. And 4, I'm not who Yahweh says I am. And E, I'm out of the divine order. I'm out of the loop. Now the loop becomes the Father, Yeshua, and the woman. I've taken myself out of the loop. You keep praying and prophesying with your head uncovered. Go ahead, see what happens. Now you know what it is? Now there's the Father, there's the man, and there's the woman. Now Yeshua, the Father, Yeshua, and the woman. Now Yeshua is the head of the woman, and the man is missing, and we hear that voice saying, Adam, where art thou? Sound familiar? And when did we hear that voice? Adam, where art thou? After man had fallen into original sin, after man had done the original transgression. You don't want to hear that voice. Not only do we remove ourselves from our priesthood, as we learned last week, we take ourselves out of the loop. And what happens when the loop is missing a wheel or it's missing a cylinder? The whole thing doesn't loop right. It's like a bicycle chain missing a couple of spokes or whatever that is, spikes, whatever. The thing doesn't turn. Is anyone getting this? Yes. But I don't want anybody to know I'm getting it. Is anyone getting this?
Yes.
Baruch Hashem Yahweh.
Baruch Hashem Yahweh. So if we can all agree that a man and a woman in the spirit realm need a what? A spiritual accountability or a covering, then what the physical ought to what? Replicate and be indicative of the spirit realm. So what is the point? Front row student, both man and woman need to have their heads covered. Why? Because they're reflecting the reality of the unseen spirit world. Amen? That we're beyond that, right? So now the question is, if a man ought not to pray with his head covered and bring shame to his head, we learn that means he is not to what? Manifest a hang-me-down. Whatever the woman hangs down, the man ought not to what? To pray with the head with the same hang-me-down. Not that he should pray uncovered, but he must not. So what is the issue here? Cross-dressing, Poseidon worship, Apollo worship, demon worship, pagan worship. This is not saying men shouldn't wear head coverings. It says a man should not pray with his head. That word was that word covered. Help me, help me, help me. Covered is kata, which according to the Jewish New Testament, David Stern, wearing something hanging down. Strong's 2596, wearing a woman's veil that hangs. A man should not wear anything hanging down that a woman wears hanging down. That's all Rashi is saying. And the reason he's saying it is not to forbid men from wearing head coverings, is to put man and woman in their proper role in the divine government. So what is this all about, brothers and sisters? This is about divine order, isn't it? All about divine order. Authority, right? Has nothing to do with head coverings. If you recognize today that we are under a divine authority, and both man and woman have a covering, then both man and woman have to wear a head covering. But not the same one. See? That's what Rashi is saying. Both man and woman ought to have their head covered, but a man ought not to cover his head with that thing that a woman uses to cover her head. Now, all of a sudden, if you take church theology, and Rabbi Moshe is wrong, right now, out of left field, you're going to have a new topic pop up. It's called hair. If I'm wrong, and church theology is right, and sad to say even messianic theology, then this makes no sense. First we start the chapter with what? Spiritual authority. Then we jump into men and women not dressing the same. Then we jump into hair. Right? Hello. How does hair tie in to divine government? Would you explain that to me? How can hair not be a separate issue? Hair must somehow tie into the topic. What is the topic? Thank you. Our roles that are different yet functional and equal in Yahweh. So a man ought not to have his head veiled like a woman, because if he does, that removes him from his role and that breaks the chain of command. And if Yahweh's chain of command is broken, Yahweh's army is broken. And if Yahweh's army is broken, it malfunctions. And if Yahweh's army malfunctions, we cannot wage war against principalities, powers, spiritual darkness in high places. So if a man prays and prophesies with his head covered, that's as bad as a woman shaving her head. So what does a woman have to do to shave her head? What does she have to get rid of? Thank you. So if a woman has to get rid of her hair to disobey Yahweh and thus pray with her head uncovered, saying that I'm not under the authority of a man, in essence, then for a man to wear a veil of hair, is doing the same thing the woman's doing. The woman's saying, I'm not under divine government. How does she say that? Because I'm going to walk according to demonic spirits and unclean spirits. And the way I'm going to show you is I'm going to be butch. That's against nature. I'm going to show you that I am anti-Messiah, that I am anti-Yahweh, by being a living example of what it means to go against nature. I'm going to shave my head and feign myself to be a man so I can sell myself as a prostitute. And the man does the opposite. He lets his hair grow and wears it like a woman wears her hair as a natural veil. See, and that's where the church gets confused. And that's where even people, ladies who wear head coverings get confused. Is Yahweh talking about a head covering for women? Or are you talking about spiritual covering? See? Both. The Hebraic mindset does not separate body, soul, and spirit. Rav Shaul said, I pray Yahweh, He maintain and preserve your body, soul, and spirit blameless unto the coming of Messiah Yeshua. Amen? The Greco-Roman mindset divides things. Okay. So now, Woman is not independent of man. Man is not independent of woman. Now, verse 12, we know that. Everything comes from Elohim. Okay. So, at the end of verse 12, 1 Corinthians 11:12, everything comes from Elohim. Listen. Everything coming from Elohim must be what? Covered. Both spiritually and physically. Because if the physical does not apply here, then Moses was in sin. David and all the people who put their head coverings on in the days of David when he danced before the ark, that all Israel was in sin, and King David caused all Israel to sin. We know that can't be. That can't be. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. Now look at verse 13. Judge for yourself. Judge for... So the question is, now here's the beautiful thing. All are to be covered, but all are not to be covered the same way. See, that's the point. All are to be covered, but woe to the man who covers like a woman, and woe to the woman who shaves and covers like a man. So rather than Rav Shaul being sent to negate the Torah, he's being sent to reestablish Torah life and order and balance in a carnal, wicked, backslidden, immoral assembly. Isn't this beautiful? But can you teach it this way if you think the Torah has been nailed to the tree? You're not going to teach it this way. Because after all, the Torah has been nailed to the tree. It can't possibly mean what Rabbi Moshe is saying. It can't possibly mean that. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. Where are we?
Verse 13.
Judge for yourself. Now, Yahweh made this so simple. You ever notice, can we talk? You ever notice how religious folks screw things up? I don't know if he means a head covering or that Messiah is the covering. I don't know if it's a real head covering, if I should buy one or a hat, or he's talking if it's spiritual. I don't know. And religion has made this so complicated. Can we talk? Most people don't know if they're coming or going. When you talk about head coverings, most women don't wear head coverings in church. Hello? And in Judaism, most men wear head coverings, but not the biblical kind, and most women don't wear head coverings, but then in some sects, some women do wear head. So in other words, nobody knows who's on first. Nobody knows if they're coming or going. This is an issue that cannot be resolved. So Yahweh says, look, I know you're not too bright. I'll be honest with you, and I'm included. Yahweh says to us, look, I know you're not too bright. I know you're not too bright. You're not a Greek scholar. You're not a Hebrew scholar. Is everybody in this room a Greek scholar? I don't know 2 words of Greek. The only Greek words I know were the curse words I learned in New York diners. I won't say it. So I'm sitting there and go, and the cook's yelling at the chef, and the chef's yelling at the usher, and the usher's yelling at the maitre d', and the maitre d' is yelling at the customers, and the customers are telling folks, they're going out, they're not paying the bill, they're not paying the check. I'm not Jackie Mason. So, we're not Greek scholars. So Yahweh says, can you comb your hair? Can you brush your teeth? If you can walk and chew gum at the same time, I will explain to you what I mean. That's why we're children of Yahweh. We're not professors of Yahweh. We're not university students of Yahweh. We're children of Yahweh. And that's why if you don't receive the kingdom of Yahweh as a little child, you're going to go around the rest of your life sticking the wrong finger at the Jews, telling them when they come into your church to take off their head covering. Instead of saying, oh, Baruch Hashem Yahweh. You're going to be like me at the Jimmy Swaggart crusade. I felt like jumping under the seat. Everybody's going to know I'm Jewish. Shut up, man. We're talking in tongues with a yarmulke on? At a Jimmy Swaggart crusade? I felt like crawling under the seat and hiding. Now I know that he was right and I was wrong. Okay, look at verse 13. Judge for yourself. So here it's going to be. You know how you're going to know who's right? Is the church teaching right, or is Rabbi Moshe's spin right? I have news for you. I haven't spinned nothing. I'm not going to spin anything. I'm going to give it to you just the way it is written. Are you with me? Now look at verse 13. Judge for yourself, children of Yahweh. Is it proper for a woman to pray to Elohim with her head uncovered? Another way to say that is shaved. Now here is the key teacher. How do people say to me, what about the dude in Africa? What about the dude in Angola? What about the Jews who never heard the gospel? Is Yahweh going to send them to hell too? All right, here's your answer. Nature teaches. Turn to your neighbor and say, nature teaches. The greatest teacher in the absence of the Ruach HaKodesh is nature. The Ruach HaKodesh is our teacher, that's Tov. But in the absence of the Ruach HaKodesh, when a man or a woman is not saved, the greatest teacher is nature. So they're without excuse. Read Romans 1. They're without excuse. They haven't been to the Miami Beach Israel Revival. Doesn't matter. They're without excuse. Judge for yourself. Does not nature teach you? Is it proper for a woman to pray with her head uncovered? What is uncovered in this context? Shaved. So if it's not natural for a woman to have her head shaved, look at verse 14. Does not nature itself teach you, if a man indeed has long hair, it is disrespect to him? So what a man not ought to do is to use long hair as a covering. Nature teaches you. If it's wrong for a man to use hair as a hang-me-down in front of my face covering, then it's wrong for a woman to shave her head and thus pray uncovered. So people say to me, well, that means women don't have to wear head coverings because the hair is what Yahweh's taught. You ever hear this one? We shouldn't wear head coverings. Why? Because Yahweh's talking about a woman's hair. Typical Greco-Roman Baptist mentality. Divide the spiritual and the natural. Instead of treating them as a holistic approach. You follow me? The truth is, if it's a shame for a woman to pray with her head shaved, even if she has hair, the natural ought to resemble what is true in the spiritual. How many pastors have you ever heard say, what happens in the natural is first manifest in the spirit? You ever hear that? First it's manifest in the spirit, and then it's manifest in the natural. You ever hear that? Is that true? It is true. So if it's manifest in the spirit that a woman has a man as a covering, and that her natural hair, her beauty, is her covering, she ought to put on her head covering, because nature is teaching her to manifest what nature herself does to her. If nature covers her, she ought to cover herself. This does not mean you've got long hair, don't put on a head covering. No. If you have hair, ladies, that is a sign. Oh, I don't believe it unless the Lord gives me a sign. All right, touch your hair. There's your sign. Nature is teaching. Not only is nature teaching, nature is giving you a sign. If you have hair, and I'm not being facetious, on medical conditions, we understand some people can't, that's okay. But in a natural situation, if you do have hair, that is a sign that, and if you ever had hair, okay, I know people age, but if you ever had hair, ladies, that is a sign that you ought to put on a cloth head covering. Nature is instructing you. Listen to Yahweh, who is instructing you through nature. So in other words, the church says, they go from divine government, verses 1 through 3, into the Jews, don't imitate the Jews, verse 4, don't imitate the Jews, verse 4, then back to verses 6 through 11, and then through, which talks about back to divine authority, and then verses 12 through 15 to talk about long hair. So they don't know who's on first, they don't know who's coming and going. Yahweh seems to be going from divine government, rebuking the Jews, they shouldn't put on a head covering, back to divine government, and ends it with a discourse on hair. Give me a break. The hair speaks of the covering speaks of divine order, and the divine order speaks of the covering. They all are interchangeable, and it makes perfect sense, and they all lead into the conclusion of the next item that Yahweh is addressing. Meaning, divine order? Yes. Divine order, everyone's under a covering? Yes. Therefore, you ought to have a covering, but a man ought not to pray and prophesy with that thing hanging down, that hair that a woman has. In other words, a man should have a head covering, but the right kind, so Torah isn't violated. What do you mean right kind? It shouldn't be locks. Hair hanging down like a woman covering parts of the face. A man should not veil his face with hair. So the church has said, you see, it says man shouldn't have a covering. It doesn't say that. It says a man ought not to have a hanging veil dishonoring his head. What they did is at the end of verse 4, they changed the head into a capital H, saying that if a man puts on a head covering, he's dishonoring Messiah. Sorry, that word is kopto, and you've got to use it the same way because it appears in the same verse. I'm preaching good today. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so simple. And if you can't receive Rabbi Moshe's instruction, then maybe you can receive nature. You touch your hair, and you see that my hair is longer than a man's. That must mean that I need to put on a cloth covering. Let's continue. And Yahweh says, verse 13, judge for yourself. Nature will teach you. If you're willing to be open-minded about it and not closed-minded, nature will teach you. And if a woman, verse 14, does not nature itself teach you? If a man has long hair, it is shameful to him. Hello? So he's rebuking men who are worshiping Yahweh like they used to worship Poseidon and Apollo. And they go to Yahweh with long hair and using it to cover their face. Yahweh says you're out of order, you're out of divine order, and you're out of Torah order because you are an abomination to Yahweh. You are using hair which was given to a woman as a natural covering, saying she should put on a head covering. You're using her natural covering, and you're bringing disrespect and shame to your head, to your kapo, and to your head, the Messiah. You're dishonoring your head and your spiritual head, the Messiah. Does that make sense? Now, again, people say to me, oh, does that mean that a man shouldn't have long hair? It doesn't say that. If a man has long hair, it has to be presented to Yahweh in a way where there's no gender confusion. You understand? A man can have long hair, but it's got to be presented to Yahweh in a way that doesn't bring gender confusion. Make sense? Isn't it neat how Yahweh treats Israel? Both men and women get to wear head coverings. I mean, that's what makes it so special about being Messianic Nazarene Israel. There's no Jew, there's no Gentile, there's no man. We all are under a spiritual covering, and we all get to wear head coverings. Only in Israel does this theology go down. Are you with me? Only in Israel does this theology go down. Because the woman and the man both get to wear head covering. But when the man does it, he better know his role. And if he appears like a woman and lets his hair hang instead of having his hair properly groomed and what? Collected, what does he do? He's shaming his head. Is that Pashat or Remez? Both. Pashat, his head, and Remez, his spiritual covering. Are you with me? Yes. Okay, verse 14. Does not nature itself teach you that if a man indeed has long hair, it is a disrespect to him? And if a woman, meaning as a veil in context, and if a woman has long hair, it is her glory, it is her esteem. Because nature has given the long hair over against the veil. Now listen, that doesn't mean over, does not mean in place of. Her long hair is given to her over a veil, meaning the one goes with over the other. Ladies, if you have naturally, Yahweh has made you not with a crew cut, but with a woman's hair, then one goes over the other. The veil, the cloth veil, goes over the hair veil, and the hair veil is over up against the cloth veil, and they're over up against each other because one rests on the other. Just like Yahweh, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit rest on each other. Man and woman become one flesh. Echad, they rest on each other. So their argument, people want to argue with me all the time. Does Yahweh mean since the woman has beautiful hair and her hair is flowing and back in the... does Yahweh consider that her covering? Read my lips. 9. If you got it, you better honor it by indicating in the natural what Yahweh gave you in the spirit. So next time someone comes to you and says, well, I don't believe this head covering business because Yahweh says that my long hair is my covering. It doesn't say that. Look at verse 15. It says, nature teaches you what you ought to put on your head, and when you do what nature teaches you, you'll have one right on top, one over the other, and the two will become echad. Yahweh will see you both as spiritually covered and physically covered. Hallelujah. Do you really want to be uncovered spiritually or physically? No. You want to be in perfect divine government, perfect divine order, and be covered naturally as a sign of, hey, I'm under the authority of Yeshua, I'm under the authority of this congregation, and I'm not a man. I honor the principle of Deuteronomy 22. I don't violate them. When man and woman begin to look alike, two heads are dishonored. Their head and their spiritual head. Let nature be your teacher. If, however, verse 16, if, however, anyone seems to be contentious, we don't have such a habit, nor do they say, oh my goodness, what does this mean? What does this mean? If someone gets contentious about this issue, you ever run into someone who gets contentious? Well, Lucy, I mean, just because it's good for you, don't make me put on a head covering. Don't tell me what to do. I have the freedom in Christ. Mm-hmm. In other words, verse 16 says, don't be contentious. Carrie, you're coming to me and telling me that all my women and all my men have to have a covering on their head to indicate their role in the spiritual realm. Don't tell me what to do. You're being contentious. And Pablo says, no contención. So you're right away, you can't be right because you're a contentious individual. See, whenever you stand for Torah, you're considered contentious. Do you ever notice that? When you stand for, Sunday brunch